warm welcome to our second podcast in our Flying Frog series. God, what a few days it has been on hybrid working. We've had the BBC announce very clearly that they're going to do a permanent hybrid working model. And Google have said that you can work from home if you like, but we're probably going to give you a 15% pay cut. And Ocado have even said, I love Ocado's one, some staff can actually go and work abroad for a month a year. But that's only if you work for group. It doesn't apply to Ocado retail. So that's the customer facing people, I guess, across the business. Quite strange that. But we also learned that across contact center operations, 79% of staff are now working from home, and that is set to stay. So we've got a lot going on, and potentially this one rule for the front line and one rule for group starting to emerge in different ways, but more of that later on. So to bring some order to what's happening around the hybrid model, we're going to be looking at 4 things today. First of all, looking at getting buy-in in the actual model itself. And then we're going to move on, secondly, to look at performance around, a lot of organizations right now are struggling with performance, especially performance stability rather than the roller coaster that seems to be happening. And we're also thirdly going to start looking at employee experience with getting that balance right between people and processes. And then finally, we're going to come back to this 2-tier culture and try and share some advice as best we can as to how to perhaps prevent it. My name is Natalie Calvert. I'm joined today by my co-host, Graham Hoskins. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Alex Marsden from the Motor Insurers Bureau, where she is the Director of Customer Operations. Prior to that, Alex worked at Monzo Bank, where she was head of distributed banking for customer operations. I think distributed banking is actually kind of really similar to what we're talking around hybrid working. And she brings to this table today a huge wealth of experience. And one of the things I love about Alex is that she's got a huge passion for people, but she's also got a lot of know-how on the operational side of things, the processes and the numbers. So she really does bring together the best of contact centers. So Alex, hybrid working, you've been working from home. How's the last 18 months been for you?
Hi, yeah, thanks Natalie, that was a nice welcome. Hopefully I can do that introduction justice with my discussions today. So working from home has been lots of highs and some I won't say lows, but some challenges. Like many people out there, I've been trying to toggle working, running a home, being a mum, being a wife, being a dog walker. And what I would say that one of the, I guess looking back, I can laugh at it now, hysterically at the time though, is that our homeschooling our teenage son has meant that whilst he's returned to school not having learned any math or English, he now has probably the UK's best FIFA career on the Xbox. So I don't know, I probably would take that as a so it's been tough, right, for everyone. So yeah, I think I'm feeling much more positive and focused now on kind of the next phase of the new normal, let's call it, and the new kind of hybrid world that we live in, which is great that we can discuss it today.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And when you're talking about new normal, but before we kind of think about the now and the future, I wanted to just take a couple of steps back. So particularly kind of thinking about your time at Monzo, and from the work we've been doing, we've seen many different kinds of hybrid working models. I mean, we've counted at least 8 different hybrid working models that organizations could potentially adopt or are adopting. But yeah, Monzo and the work you were doing there was very, very innovative. So why was that distributed model, as you called it, kind of chosen in the first place, and how did you keep the board convinced that was the right way to continue working?
Sure. Yeah, I think It's really interesting because you're right. At the time that I joined Monzo, it was to look after. It was called distributed operations, but in essence, it was the remote teams. And having reflected kind of on how that came about when I joined, obviously Monzo, as the UK's kind of biggest challenger bank at the time, were in a period of hypergrowth, right? So having to keep pace with the internal operations service requirement, that's processes, people, with the customer growth that was being achieved in kind of 2019 and 2020. So I suppose in part there was probably two primary drivers for it that probably had been agreed pre me joining as this is the only way we can achieve the business plan. One was, look, we're headquartered out of London. We know that we can't recruit from 100 to 1,000 frontline members of our team in and around London from a cost and a talent access perspective. So we need to look at that differently. And secondly, just the speed at which we needed to onboard and get our operations teams up and running to meet the customer demand. So I think those two things happened to create this perfect environment where the cost and the speed to access the talent and to provide the services meant that the way to deliver it was through a remote working model. And that was disruptive in the market, and it still has been, for me, the only place that I've worked that disrupted that way, using technology to deliver that. And obviously just kind of a bit of a change of mindset, really. I joined Monzo from a large retail bank, so faced many of the same, I guess, requirements in terms of service or operations delivery. And yet, the infrastructure perhaps had not allowed or supported a home working model at that time. Of course, that's different now, and we've seen, I think what's interesting is most companies have had to adopt the home working or remote working model.
Yeah. And so you mentioned access to talent, but you also mentioned that you had the technology to enable you to do that. I know when you and I have spoken in the past about how you used technology. So not necessarily the technology that allowed phone calls to be distributed out to your team members, but you used sort of social technology in quite an innovative way, as I recall our discussions, whether it was change management, whether it was team management or development, used the technology in quite an innovative fashion.
I think so, and I think for me it was the first time that I'd been exposed to and started to really leverage maybe the way in which some of the tech companies work, kind of Google, Apple, et al., rather than the traditional financial services, maybe communication tools, which would be more traditionally kind of email, in some places still white mail, just starting to use SMS. So it was really interesting to start to use different types of media communications. So from Slack to Yammer to all of these, I guess, quick, agile, gamified, if you will, fun tools to deliver project management, to deliver comms, to deliver talent and development training, to deliver risk awareness. So it was really exciting to be part of that team at that time, and I think as well, it really allowed for the members of the operations team to have a much more interactive relationship, despite the fact that you may never meet your line manager or you may never meet your colleagues. Because of the distance, some people were working at completely opposite ends of the UK and beyond, and so that really allowed for that kind of community element of remote working, which again I think previously wouldn't have been achieved in the same way with the more traditional kind of comms tools or methods, I would say.
And how did you keep your powers that be at the board level? How did you keep them convinced that was the right way to keep going? Because obviously this was all pre-COVID, so there wasn't something nationally that was pushing you to stay there. You had to keep them convinced it was the right way.
One thing I if I reflect back on that, and I think we're going to talk a bit about performance in a moment, but really it was interesting because I think the way in which at a board level or a senior leadership team level, it was measured, was really just looking at performance output, I guess, if you will. So, was the cost and the output, meeting the kind of the internal requirements, and it was benchmarked based on what had been achieved in a more physical office location, which I think had some disadvantages, because of course it was new and it was going to look and feel slightly different. So it was really trying to keep pace with, how much can an individual control how productive or how engaged they are versus how much can the systems or technology help support how quick or how engaged someone might be. So I think it was sort of finding our way through both that benchmark, traditional kind of KPI, it looks good or it doesn't, versus at what point, what's the tipping point by which we would say we now need to, leverage automation again or change what we're doing to achieve a different or a greater level of output. So it was very numbers driven, and I think that's probably, a precursor to pre-COVID, where that was the way in which you measured performance in a more traditional contact center. Regardless of what the measure is that the KPI that you have is, there's always something, right?
Yeah.
Interesting, Alex. Did you see any impacts on the customer there at all, apart from the internal numbers? What was the impact on the customer?
The customer, and actually to this day, customer satisfaction and performance of that company remain really, really strong in that market, which means that the talent, the frontline staff, the operations teams that were part of that community were absolutely excellent at providing great customer service. So that kind of the internal and the external, deliverables, right? So I've always felt very, very happy and very proud to have been part of a team that delivered great customer service, despite there being, in the back end, still the same challenges that you have in many firms around, do things knit together seamlessly? Have I got everything that I need at any one given time? It's the same in most places, right? So customer impact was minimal. Customer impact in terms of automation changes was great, because we were able to use technology to make more real-time changes that improved the journey for the customer.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And so you were at Monzo when the pandemic started. So
yeah.
You were almost from the contact center point of view, the best setup you could have been, because you were already doing it. That didn't affect you in that respect. But I know you said it did affect the teams who were office based, but then had to move to work from home, and actually gave you an interesting benchmark against what good was looking like for your people who were already working from home in a kind of that hybrid distributed model.
Yeah, sure. It was really curious. So I think a couple of things. So one was, what was great, of course, was that the majority of the company were already able to work from home and used to it. So that carried on almost as normal, despite the not at all normal situation we were in. And then there was the cohort of, we had one physical contact centre in the UK which had to switch to home working, and the ability to do that using technology was quick. So we were able to get everyone at home out of the contact centre and out of our head offices. That worked really, really well. But what started to happen over kind of the next few months was a gap between, if you will, productivity and engagement. It almost sort of reversed itself, whereas up to that point, the remote teams had always performed slightly less well on those internal measures, not the external kind of customer one, but the internal measures. What we started to see was once home working, I guess the reality or the structure or the lack of structure of working from home kicked in for anyone who'd been office based, we started to see the performance dip a little bit, and the kind of the remote teams sort of almost start to kind of go, do you know what, hey, we've been doing this okay for a while now, and look, we've actually got this, we can do this. And I think that also not just at work, right? I noticed I mentioned homeschooling earlier. I noticed from homeschooling that what actually happened was people had to adopt technology that they'd never used in the office before or in a school environment before, i.e. teachers having to start to use Zoom, having to manage people's engagement, health and well-being, look at body language differently when you've never met. So I think that dynamic shifted, and kind of got to a level out point where I think I was able to kind of say, we the remote teams have done a really, really good job. And one of the benefits of home working generally, from my experience, has been that you often get a slightly higher level of output because there's no commuting, there's no downtime in between the shift. You've not got that interaction with other people throughout the day. That does have its disadvantages, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But productivity, and engagement for the remote teams became, I would say, really good. And I think it was interesting to see anyone involved in home working at that time start to realise how difficult remote working was. And it always been perceived, I would say, I don't know if you would agree, it had always been perceived to that point as, I'm not working as hard.
Easy deal.
On a Friday admin day at home, but we'll see. So yeah, it was really interesting, and the teams did really well.
You mentioned earlier on a tipping point. Were there maybe a couple of initiatives or things that took place that enabled that, when you suddenly saw the light at the end of the tunnel, knowing it would all be okay? Was there a new piece of tech or something different that happened?
I think that the one really good aspect was creating communities where anyone who had previously been office-based and was wanting some tips and techniques we were able to share a lot of that information, Natalie. So almost having access to a community and a family within the company where you were allowing people to share their stories, the impact that it had on them, and acknowledging that it had an impact for everyone in many different and varied ways, and not one was greater or lesser than another person's experience. But being able to kind of raise that up, and I remember kind of after the first lockdown, it must have been towards the middle of last summer, there was a really, really great virtual, of course, away day, if you will. If you remember the old style away days where you'd go to an event and it'd be an all day, or there might be some additional activities in the evening. Virtual away day, and some of the leaders who worked in their teams, so kind of team leaders or thereabouts, really were brave and shared stories around how it had impacted them and what they had done to get themselves through that journey and what they were going to do moving forward. And they'd shared it with their teams. And so I think that was a bit of an eye-opener for everyone, certainly me, to think about, we do need to allow space and time for people to talk about perhaps how they're working, how they're feeling, what their challenges are, and as a community help them navigate through that. And that worked really, really well. So it's kind of I would say that point last year after the first lockdown, that it felt like we were kind of coming together again.
It's great that you've invested that time in kind of building that remote working culture within your organization, so that you can from that build the community. At the moment we're seeing organizations where in many ways, we were discussing this the other day, they're kind of ripping out the culture in their new offices. They're removing everything, sanitizing, and desks in our places. You just pop your laptop and then you clean it at the end of the day and leave.
Sure.
But you're bringing in that cultural piece now, which is just, I think, so important moving forward for people to know their company, know their brand, and feel part of the family, even though they're at home, maybe working on their own. Yeah,
I would agree. Obviously, I left Monzo at the end of last year, so I don't have an up-to-date position. I would hope, and I'm sure that that's still the same. But yeah, for me, that was a really good experience.
And what about where you are now? How do you do that now?
So at MIB, yeah, they've been pretty awesome at moving everyone to home working, and I think again, a different experience for many of the operations team who had not had experience of home working before. And I think this is where some of you referenced earlier, the hybrid models and the trying to navigate through how you do it, where in an organisation where not many people had experience working from home before, to have to flick that overnight almost, wasn't it? MIB have done that brilliantly well with an amazing support from the technical team and everyone in the front line. But I think that has had slightly different challenges, less around this disparity around productivity or performance, because of course the benchmark wasn't there in the first place, but more around how are we going to move forward from home working. So if you, I don't know if you have got experience of this with other people or companies that you're speaking to, but so from no home working to full home working and back again in the space of 18 months is quite a shift. And I would say, you know, and I can give some insight into that in a bit, but the cultural element has been really, really strong, and the engagement scores at MIB are upper quartile in terms of how that how the employees feel. But that is this is a company that has been in existence for a very long time, and of course has built up a really good tenure of staff and knowledge that can be shared and relationships that have been built. So it's not a new firm, and I think that's really helped us to kind of stay galvanized together to perform.
I think your point about the question of where to move forward or how to move forward, and it is something that we are talking to clients about. And actually I put a poll on LinkedIn at the start of the week about what's the biggest risk, or the biggest challenge for organizations moving forward, and is it what is our new operating model? Is it health and safety? Is it performance management? And the one that's coming out top is, what's our new model? What should it be?
Yeah.
I still think there's many organizations that are just unsure.
Yeah. And I guess there's that. I guess there's the challenge at an organizational level. If you've got a physical footprint, you have got a heavy overhead in terms of cost, and do you disperse of that? Do you not disperse of it? And I suppose that's a more strategic question for any company. And I guess once you've decided that, then you're able to kind of roll down. Then what do we expect everyone to do? But I would say the things that I have missed, and I think perhaps have been missing from not having any office interaction, for me will have been engagement, relationship building. I'm a real extrovert. I get a real sense of energy from people, and doing that over Zoom. I mean, there have been times over the last year where I've not even wanted to Zoom my family of an evening because we've got Zoom fatigue or meeting fatigue. So I guess I'm missing a little bit of that. And I think for operations, I think we've been also replatforming during this time, so moving systems and actually providing maybe more of a community or cohort for a learning environment. I'm not quite sure I've got that right from an oversight perspective with everyone at home, and I can't kind of get away from that. I mean, maybe it's rose tinted glasses, right? I'm not sure, but that being in a classroom environment and being able to share what you're learning, and I've not quite yet cracked how I can do that brilliantly, if I'm honest, from home. So I think I feel a sense of responsibility that I would want anyone in my team to be able to come and have that experience as well, especially when you're moving systems, which is tricky enough anyways, right?
And the learning and development piece, it has been incredibly challenging. I think there's some really good things that have been learnt around, how long can you keep someone online? There's some real basics, and just some rules around, everyone having to switch their videos on and participate, and using a bit of gamification to create the fun around it all. There are some real tangible tools, if you like, that one can look at in terms of the L&D stuff. But I think at the end of the day, it is about, providing the tools, the technology, but also making sure it's now fit for purpose. Because one of the things that's happened in our world is we've shifted from what was predominantly kind of phone, email, chat into chat, email, phone. We totally shifted the whole dimension, and I'm experiencing and seeing in clients that this whole piece where people are not skilled in the right way to be delivering the new service model that's required with the new way of working. So interesting kind of thinking there around how do we do that.
Yeah, I would agree, and it is funny. I was on the train for the first time in 16 months, a month or so ago, and I was taking a conference call, and I'd forgotten how to do that because we've not done it. So we've got so used to and so great at whatever method you use, be it Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, but not the actual conference call situation. So we do have MIB, we do still have the traditional channels and they're working well. But I do wonder how we and any organisation are going to clarify that moving forward, which is what is your communication strategy internally? What is your expectation when you're back in the office? Does it change? And how do you layer in that one-on-one kind of discussion? Where does that come in? Or am I still teamsing you, Natalie, even though I'm sitting next to you now? I don't know. That might be a thing. So I think we have to work through that too.
Yeah, and how do I, as a manager, deal with the people in front of me as well as the people on Zoom if I'm running a huddle? Am I, become this multifaceted juggler with kind of two heads going on? It's a conundrum there. It is. I think it's also interesting what you were saying around the model, where some of the work that we've done is kind of where, we shift from this firefighting where we all went into lockdown overnight and working from home into some form of stability. But the bigger issues now are also emerging, aren't they? Cyber security, fraud coming in as a big one, as well as the general employee engagement, perhaps not for your organisation, but I know for other organisations as well. I guess just moving on to this piece around finding this balance with people between the processes that you've got to run them and make them efficient and get the kind of performance and productivity drivers working in the right direction, alongside all of the staff well-being piece. And it's how do we do that? How do you get the balance right? What would be your thoughts there, Alex? Well, how do we get the balance right?
Is that Natalie, do you mean in terms of fully remote or the hybrid model or either or both?
Tick, 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 yeah. All of the above, please.
I think, look, I think for me, there's if I focus on, if the people that I work with are clear about what we're trying to achieve, feel that we are supporting them and are clear about the expectations, and we recognise and reward fairly, and we allow time for development, and we encourage and foster an environment where we can talk about and share ideas or issues. I actually think the tool we do it with, or where we're based, becomes largely agnostic to that, because I think it's about creating that environment, be it remotely or physically. So I would still come back to, as we navigate through returning to the office on a flexible basis, or does that mean X or Y? I think if we continue to focus on what do our individual colleagues need and the environment with which we're working, I think we'll work our way through it. But I do think it will be challenging, and I think probably for me, setting a rigid plan may feel that we're not quite there yet, because I think we certainly, from my perspective, and at MIB, we've been very focused on everyone's safety, health and well-being, support during this time. And as the guidelines now are changing quite quickly and seem less clear now than ever around what we may or may not do, we're trying to work our way through that, but continue to be focused on colleagues' safety, health and well-being, and we'll get to the right answer. But we are traditionally an office-based firm, and we'll be going back on a flexible basis.
So kind of the advice there, focus on the people, and other stuff will work around it, really, and fall into place. Or is there something else there?
For me, it would work that way, I guess. I'm not sure for anyone else, but I did want to just touch on the point you raised earlier about this two-tier model, which is, I think, that what I have kind of come to the conclusion on that is that if you are going to have any either full choice, so anyone can choose from a range of options, through to a fixed model, I think the benefit of the distributed versus contact centre experience in Monzo was it was quite clear which part you were joining in terms of expectation of performance, benefits, employee engagement, way of working. Although the infrastructure was the same, and by that I mean the tools and the systems, you were joining a very clear cohort. and that they had very different elements to them. I worry and I wonder how, if some companies are just going to go kind of pick and choose, how you would drive that employee value proposition through, how you would clearly articulate the benefits of each option. And I quite haven't yet been able to see a way through that. So my thinking on the 2-tier would be create the separation, have either fully flexible or have fixed, you know, and make them work for themselves. Yeah, I haven't been able to see a way through this kind of, if you want to rock up on a Monday afternoon, do it, but then you want to have a free lunch in the office on a Thursday, but you want to have home working benefits. I just don't know how that would work.
Because you've got the contact centre, but you've also got now different rules coming in at group level versus what's happening in the contact centre. So you've not just got different office and home, but you've got different them and us now re-emerging. In the ASDA announced a couple of weeks ago that they're having, you know, if you work at group level, just like Ocado, you can work from home. But if you're in the contact centre, you're in, right? So different models.
It's a bit, yeah, I hadn't heard the Ocado one, but I think that for MIB, you know, we are all in this together, and I think that's one of the strengths of the company. We are all going to return on a flexible basis, and that can be flexible in terms of different kind of, you know, I'm sure it might not always be a Monday, etc., but we are going to all do that. And I think the sooner we do that and start to share stories around what benefits we're finding or what challenges we're finding, the easier it'll be for anyone else to return. I guess I would, if there were clear benefits for group doing something and country doing, or local region doing something different, it would be great to articulate them if you were in that environment. But I would suspect it will cause a little bit of dissatisfaction internally. So yeah, I wouldn't be a fan of that.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a tough one. Can I also just pick up on something else that you said there about the different cohorts between the distributed model and the contact centre, as well as the hybrid? The sensitive subject of pay, always a tough. What's your view on the pay differences that may or may not go on in that environment?
Well, I've always been lucky in that, having worked with some really strong people teams who always use benchmark data to help that discussion. And I guess that's an internal discussion around what budgets anyone might have. But I think using benchmark data has been really helpful to look at. You know, if you are having a physical location, that is going to always be slightly underpinned by the salary of the physical locations that you are competing with, right? So if you're in a hub where, you know, you are in amongst a number of other FS providers or contact centres for, I don't know, retail or whatever, you are always going to have a band that you're going to have to work within, or you're going to, you know, be worrying about your retention strategy and costs, right? I guess the flip of that is, you know, if you look remotely, you want to look fairly across the kind of region with which you're recruiting someone, right, within your salary bands, I would imagine. And really, again, to come back on that point about being clear of the differential. So if you are office based, you've got to commute, you've got to pay for probably commuting in via transport, you've got to pay for food, you've got to maybe pay for, if you have care situations at home, you've got to find support. That has a cost. If you're home working, you don't have those things, so it's slightly less cost in terms of outlay, but equally you probably need or want slightly different benefits, so more flexibility in the schedule perhaps to work around, you know, commitments you might have at home. So I guess it's being clear about what you're getting in each of those cohorts, isn't it? And then you know what you're joining and you know what the expectations are.
Yeah, that clarity is really important, isn't it?
Actually, it was a quick, when we last week asked for questions from the audience, there was a question from a gentleman, Ben Smithwell, and we were talking about, and it was about 2-tier cultures, and saying it was in response to, is a 2-tier culture inevitable? His response was, well, maybe a better question is, what is the nature of those emergent cultures, and actually to what degree does it matter? So from what you're saying, there are emergent cultures, and actually almost embracing them and understanding them, as opposed to trying to fight them and find the ways to make them work, is the way to do it. And it isn't, and it does matter, because they're emerging, you need to find ways to deal with them.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's fair?
Yeah, I think so. I was also reading an article in relation to kind of this movement of office to home around, some companies, I can't remember who, but anyone who's based in high cost of living areas, i.e. London, suggestion that the old London waiting that always used to apply, or the higher salary if you were in a city with a high cost of living, that would be removed. But of course that only works if you're not living in that place anymore, right? You still have the same cost. So I think there's a whole load of stuff to work through, and I suppose that some of the headlines that are out at the moment could be a little misleading, but certainly I think for some companies they are getting it right, but perhaps the companies that are getting it right have already a culture where it is a good community, it's a strong culture, it's an engaged environment, and therefore there's that trust to move forward and try different ways of working.
It's interesting because I read similar, I think, it's the UK government, where the UK government is encouraging everybody to come back to work, but now also promoting flexible working, and also looking to remove potentially London waiting. So again, just that confusion at that level doesn't really help the other organisations to move forward. But I think hopefully customer orientated organisations have got a bit of a head first, because they've been traditionally great customer experience directors, customer service directors, are really good at looking after their staff. So hopefully that one will mitigate the other. It's an interesting session that we've had. I think a lot's come out of it. It's been very valuable hearing your views, Alex. For me, what I'm going to take away is really around clarity, number one, being really clear on what you are doing. It might not be the right answer, but giving people clarity is very important. And I think the second thing that sits with that is, you've mentioned, I like the way you said earlier on about not being rigid, but having a framework. So people are, again, it's back to clarity. They know what the differences mean, and it means to them and also to the organisation at a wider level. And I've heard a lot about culture and making sure that you kind of really look after your people, but in a way that delivers what the business needs in terms of performance and productivity. And, I applaud what you're doing around culture. And I think a lot of other organizations could take a lead from you on that, so that they realize that we don't have to rip it out, but really build into this new world and build the culture across it. So clarity, framework, and culture. And if there's a fourth one for me, it's about benchmarking. You mentioned forums and benchmarking and getting the insight to make sure that you are on the right track. And it's something that we've been talking about. Maybe we'll pick up as another topic at some point. Oh, big thank you to you, Alex. Much appreciated for you joining us today and giving up your valuable time. We'll be doing our next podcast shortly, but in the meantime, join us either on YouTube or on Spotify or Buzzsprout, wherever you get your podcasts from. Pick up there. And if you've got any questions, please send them through either via LinkedIn or to Graham or myself, however you feel to send them across. And we will see you shortly. Thanks for joining us. Thank you from Graham, myself. Big thank you to Alex again. And bye for now from Flying Frogs. Thank you.